All right, good morning everybody here in Rovaniemi and you there online. I don't know if you can see me. Welcome everybody. I'm really honored to be able to open this seminar on digital cultural heritage. The topic is especially important here in Lapland, not only Finnish Lapland, but the whole Lapland, where indigenous Sami culture is experiencing, I would say that some kind of post-colonial cultural revival. Objects of Sami cultural heritage are being repatriated and digitalized. It is important that after a long history of ignorance and even disrespect, the Sami culture is treated in an ethical and respectful manner. This is very important. And there has been research at our university on digitalization of Sami culture already earlier in the Faculty of Arts by Professor Juhana, Professor Rosa Balladini and her team now actually gained funding from our university strategic funding resources, which I'm really grateful for. And from the point of view of the Faculty of Law, this topic is really fruitful, and it's fruitful for cooperation, not only between faculties and units of our university, but also internationally. And Rosa's project is, I understood, quite international. And I wish to express my gratitude to Rosa and her team, and especially to you, our honored guests. And I wish you an interesting and enjoyable seminar. You are all welcome. And then I forgot to say that this session or this seminar is being recorded, so that all of you know. But yes, you are very warmly welcome. Thank you all for participating.
Okay, hello everyone, also from my behalf. My name is Juhana Riekkinen. I'm a university lecturer in legal informatics here at the University of Lapland. I have been asked to moderate this first session, where we have 3 presentations. First up is Professor Dorit talking about Arch Heritage toward a new approach to archival studies for cultural heritage. After that, we have Professor Fabio Vitali with the presentation expressing uncertain statements in digital metadata in the humanities, the case of digital cultural heritage. And then the third presentation of this session will be by Professor Peter Metsä, entitled Mine, Yours, Theirs, What are the copyright implications of NFTs? So I will not take up too much of your time. We have approximately 30 minutes per presentation, and I will try to politely first hint that you are approaching the end of the allotted time, and then at latest at 25 minutes I will be a little bit more impolite and say that please stop, so that we have at least a little bit of time for questions, because I'm sure there will be questions both from the online audience and from this room. So please, in the online environment, we have the possibility of chat also. So if you want to also present your questions there, they can be read aloud here in the room afterwards, and we will try to provide answers also to those questions provided in the chat. But you should also be able to unmute yourself at an appropriate time, so you will be able to participate in the discussion. So, as I said, the first presentation is by Professor Dorit. from the University of Venice, Università Ca' Foscari of Venezia. And I will not try to explain in more detail what the presentation is about. You will hear that in a second. Professor Rains, as I understand, is a historian and a librarian, and perhaps she will tell a little bit more about herself in the beginning of the presentation. But as you can also read from the profile in the program, that you probably have seen, she has a quite extensive curriculum and experience from many different fields. And I'm very interested to learn about this new approach to archival studies for cultural heritage. So please, Dorit, if you'll take the floor.
Thank you. So I'll try to be in time exactly. All right. Now, I'm here not only to talk about a new approach to archival studies, but just take into consideration that I am a user, first of all. I am a historian and I teach usually a history of archives and libraries, and I use, of course, digital cultural heritage, digital objects, and this is where I start from. Sorry, how can I go back? Here, like this. Okay. Okay. So, first of all, let's start with certain certainties that we used to have, or we are still having, in the realm of archival studies, and see exactly where can we intervene with them. So the first thing, you know that I will talk about various things that you know, but I want to be on the same page with all of you, so please bear with me. So usually archival records are considered the material that are created by one who is a creator, in order to give context to each and every record, which usually is in a series. So usually they would reflect the activity of the creator. This is, let's say, the substance of what in archival studies is considered an archival record until today. Now, today we have on the web two types of digital objects, ones that represent material objects, and the others that represent native digital objects, of course. And as you see here, a digital object is made of data, metadata, protocols, and operations, and we hope, but not always, of persistent identifiers. Now, almost all digital objects which represent texts or images or coins or maps are images. Even text are images as digital objects. And of course, the images are fundamental for our cultural heritage. So, if we go back afterwards to what the Society of American Archivists thinking about what is going to happen with archival records, they note also that documents rather than artifacts or published materials, although collections of archival records may contain artifacts and books, the records themselves may be in any format, including text on paper, electronic formats, photographs, motion pictures, videos, sound records. So they took into consideration as well that we are not in the realm of the analog objects that were only textual records, but they come in any formats, and they, first of all, on the internet are images. Now, today, when we put our digital images that with their metadata, of course, in repositories, they become, quite frankly, digital archive collections. So today, all the digital objects that we have that are in repositories, okay, are archival records, really. Now, the difference between digital archival, let's say, museums and collections are that collections are not cherry-picked, were not selected. What you see here, for example, they are designed just to be put in an unbiased way, okay? There isn't any middleman that interpret these things. Any user can do whatever he wants with them. But the fact that they have this metadata, they are put in repositories, means exactly that they are archival records, they are digital objects and archival records. So today we're talking about archiving online, exactly, and not as libraries usually. Now, if you look at an archival repository that stores digital objects, usually they do it for long periods, and they are ensuring exactly that the formats will stay the same, unless, of course, you would have to put it somewhere else, okay? So usually they would replicate digital objects, but here is where we start our journey, exactly how to replicate these things and how can be sure exactly what the replication is made of. Now, another certainty that we have usually is that once upon a time we had an original and a copy. It was very clear exactly, well, very clear, you see here, the Roman and the Greek world, okay, but we knew that there was an original and then there were copies. And of course, you know very well, in the archival studies, but also in juridical studies, there is a simple copy, of course, but there is also a certified copy, which is a duplicate of a document done by a notary public, court clerk, or a solicitor. So we have this uncertainty that although we are making copies, we know exactly where they come from and that they replicate exactly the original copy that was in the analog world. Now, today, with the digital objects, we have some problems. First of all, we need to know exactly what is the original, what is the copy. If it's a native digital object, it can be the original, of course, but I have to know exactly when a copy is made, what kind of modifications it had gone through. So we usually, this is the suggestion, we have properties, and among them the no modification policy, which of course represents itself with version chains, and we have also the universal handles that guarantees that the object retains exactly its handles regardless of which repositories is replicated to. So where is the problem? Why am I talking to you about all this thing? Now, first question is this: is the whole institution really guarantees for the digital objects properties, and in what conditions? The second thing is, and I'm going to show you, is that we have a chaos online. Now, if we are going to want to see the Mona Lisa, for example, this is, I digitized Mona Lisa, and what you see on Google is this. Now, as a user, which digital objects am I going to use exactly? If I'm a user or a search user, that has to be sure that I'm talking about this property, because what we have here is various formats, various colors, of course, and we don't know exactly how this was replicated from the original objects. What is the pedigree of all this? We don't know. There isn't any way of knowing this thing. Now, this is the representation, of course, of the material objects. And afterwards, I can find on the internet all kinds of things that represent part, of course, or entirely the Mona Lisa, as you see here. And if I go just to one of these replications, you see it even for sale, and it just gives me the measures. That's it. I can select it, and that's it. We stop at that. No metadata other than this. Now, this is an example, for example, of a researcher, a German one, that, of course, is talking about the identity of the Mona Lisa, and the replication here, of course, which is used. I don't know exactly what she has used, exactly what she had seen. So the point is that I'm not so sure exactly what kind of language we're talking about today when we are using digital objects. Now, if I go to Wikimedia Commons, which really tries to at least do some order in this mess, as you see here, this is a replication that comes from the host institution itself, here, as you see. And if we go, you can see that it gives us various ways of formats that we can choose ourselves, resolutions, and they tell us that what the original file is all about, and also it gives us exactly more or less what kind of uses we can do with this. That's all. Now, if we go to the metadata, which is really nice, the metadata is about the original object. It's not replicating exactly what processes has been used to replicate what we are seeing here and how, in what way I can use it. And as you see here, afterwards, they replicate from the host institutions. We have various digital objects with various even coloring. What does that mean exactly? So what I'm facing with today is a kind of a chaos online that you will see more and more, even in a more reflected and selected repositories. For example, the British Library use the IIIF grade, I say. So let's see exactly what they're doing. So the IIF, you know, is a sort of a standard for delivering high quality digital objects. It's a set of standards which afterwards serves for applications to represent the digital object and the metadata. Now, this is mostly the framework, the ecosystem, where, as you see here, there are various repositories. Some of them really have various things of linked data, some others less, because you can sometimes annotate even on the digital objects, as you see here. And this is the framework of the IIIF, as you see here, that starts from the canvas, which is a single page. And of course, we have the order of the pages. And afterwards, you have book viewer or whatever, mirrored or whatever you want. So we have standards for that. The question is whether inside this, you have also a consideration for the processes that all these digital objects are undergoing. No, there isn't any consideration. Let's see exactly just one image of the of this IIIF in the British Library. I chose the block books collection. It doesn't matter. Let's see what it has. This starts the record here. And here you see on the right side, this is all the metadata. All this metadata, it digitized from whatever, doesn't tell me exactly what the process was from the original object to this object, which is, of course, in the host institution. As you see here, no information at all is delivered. Now, if we go, and this is the last example that I want to show you, Mirador, of course, is also an image viewer. And as you see here, this is a self-portrait of Gauguin with the metadata. And what the host, the Mirador, the host institution using this is giving me is the provenance, but the provenance of the original object, of course, and afterwards, the same as the Mona Lisa, gives me a sort of all sorts of digital objects, but I don't know exactly the difference between them. Okay, so the problem is this. I don't know what I'm using today on the online. This is the problem. And when can we construct a sort of a genealogy tree of a pedigree instead that can say on online, okay, these are validated objects. I know exactly how they have been processed. The others, one can use, one cannot use, but he's not sure exactly what they represent. So we know today we have various standards that we can always use. We have the linked open data, of course, which uses structured data. And of course, it can link from various repositories with the metadata, various digital objects. We have all sorts of standards as HTTP, the RDF, and the URI. This is very important because they are standards that give us the possibility to link all the data. Now, we, as you say, Tim Barnes even told us that there are 5-star open data in the load. I'm not going to get into this for lack of time, but afterwards we can discuss it. This is not the point. Now, the principle of provenance here is very important. And the question is exactly how we are going to establish this principle of provenance, which means that I have to validate the process that one digital object, where it comes from exactly, and I have to put into a link between these two objects, because sometimes a digital object can be processed from another digital object, from a photography that represents also the material object. So just to give you an example of what is going on with the government, because they have all sorts of records and they also have to represent it. The Gartner is a very big consulting firm that each and every year publishes the hype cycle for technology. Now, in their hype cycle for digital government technology for 2021, as you see here, the authenticated provenance is expected only in 5 to 10 years. So we are very much behind all this thing. If even the governments cannot solve this problem, we have a problem here. Now, I'm going now to present an idea that I have that perhaps can solve this. Of course, it will have to be worked on quite thoroughly. Now, taking the CDOC CRM, the conceptual reference model that really is based on the RDF, and which represents a composite sometimes link between various objects like images, like places, like records, and so on. And this is a very useful tool. Exactly, you see here representing the Yalta conference with images, with places, with time span, and so on. Taking this into consideration, what we have today, the CDOC CRM have more or less 165 properties, I think, today. Among them, we have at least 3 that we can use, but the problem is this: how do we know really, okay, if the digital objects that are used to create the cultural heritage correspond to the original ones? So the question is, how can I really validate the, perhaps if I even put in the CIDOC CRM the material objects and all its copies, how to validate exactly the passage from one to another, because otherwise I didn't do anything that can be of worthwhile. So the question is, what can I use exactly to validate this? Now, this is a material object that is represented in the CIDOC CRM. You see, it's very, very composite. And I can assure you that in the CIDOC CRM, we can link all the copies to this. There are properties, but the question is the validation. So the only technology that we know today that can help us is blockchain. Now, blockchain is a very big world, of course, and where we are using exactly to validate things, and it's really a record-keeping technology, more or less. So the question is, these are types of technologies that are used in the blockchain, and what we're talking about for our purpose is a public one, it's a mirror one, yes, and it's a permissioned one. The question is whether CIDOC CRM and blockchains are compatible. 1 year and a half ago, with another colleague, we have followed a student of us in the Digital Humanities Master that have tried to map exactly CIDOC CRM and blockchain to see whether they are compatible, and she has arrived to the conclusion that there is a lot of work to do on this, but it can be done. It will be otherwise very difficult to sort out exactly what kind of digital objects we are dealing with today. So what we are talking about here is a permissioned blockchain. This is very important, that the participant must authenticate or validate the not only the digital object, this is the point, but the metadata that is following. Usually the blockchain does not, usually the digital object, or because it's not only on Bitcoin, that is used. Usually, you do not attach the metadata for with it, because it begins to be very, very slow. The question is how we can use also the metadata validated with a validated process in it. This will be, I think, the most difficult part in the blockchain part. And another question, and with this I'm finishing my presentation, another question, very big question is, okay, in Bitcoin, we know exactly what the reward is for each and every validator. The question is, in a cultural heritage one, what is the reward? A very recent article presented, I think, a very good solution for that, is that the each and every validator, which will be a host institution, will get digital token storage. You know that storage today and maintenance is costly. And so if, for example, let's take into account a platform like Europeana, which already has 3,500 host institutions into that have all the standards, okay, that usually has been done with the EU. I mean, it's an all-European one. Of course, will have to be restructured properly, but using Europeana, which already has that, and giving the validator, which are host institutions, but also privates, because sometimes privates also have various collections, and giving them digital tokens for storage may perhaps solve the problem, because otherwise no host institution will be mad enough to start validating things for others. So using really tokens for storage can perhaps be the solution for tomorrow's, let's see, or Europeanas or whatever other platform that on an all European level can validate the digital objects online. Otherwise, we are facing more and more chaos and fake data. This is one of the problems here. Yes, and with that, I thank you.
Okay, thank you. If you'll please stay here for a moment, we might have questions. So we are perfectly on schedule with about 10 minutes for questions and discussions for this first presentation. First, I checked the chat. There are no questions so far there, but please, if you want to write there, that's a possibility, or you can just raise your hand either physically here in the room or in the Teams app to ask for the chance to present a question. Yes, please.
Yeah. Hello. It was a very interesting presentation. Of course, very technical. Sometimes it's also very difficult to understand. I know that my son has started writing his bachelor thesis, something on non-fungible filter. So is it something related to that?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Well, yes and no, in the sense that what we are talking about here is really, I think that the digital objects themselves, of course, can be validated without any problems. The problem is the metadata and the process that it goes from one to another. Now, the NFT is exactly the opposite of what I'm talking about here, because the NFT does not make copies. It does not allow to make copies. Here, what I'm talking about is an environment that can make copies. I don't have problems with copies. What I have a problem is that I have to know exactly what has been done, in what format, in what size, in what density, in what color exactly, what has gone from one to another. This is my problem here. It's the metadata that has to be validated. So the NFT, of course, uses blockchain as well. Yeah, but it's on the other realm, of course, of the blockchain, because it really blocks a digital object which cannot be replicated. What I'm talking about here is a system where you can replicate other things, but please tell me exactly what you've been done, and I want the metadata to be validated, okay, so that nobody else afterwards can change this digital object. This is the problem. So yes, I've been looking for the NFT exactly to here, yes, because it's on the it's a part of the same problem, okay? This is the point here, but I think that whereas the NFT is blocking and does not allow a copy of it, what I'm talking about here is
that NFT is about, the original product, the original kind of, it is an image, like you were showing Mona Lisa's image. So it is not to copy from the original one, but then does it have something similar with what you have been presenting about, making copies and validating copies as they are copies, not the original one? So
the question is here is also when we're talking about original ones, because what I was representing is that well, each copy that is made from an original, which can be a copy of an original, copy of original, copy of original, which is not really original because it was copied for something else. Yes, but what we are really, I think, only in the beginning of a process which will take some years to go, and I think that first of all, a conceptual model should be made before even going to try to do some things. The NFT surely will get into that. I'm sure of that. that's why I was looking forward. I think you were going to talk about it. That's what I was looking forward to. Yes, we'll see. We are really at the beginning of something, of a process here, I think.
Yeah, this is very interesting.
Yes.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, comments? Yes, maybe let's get the microphone a bit closer. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this extremely.
Just a second, you pass the mic.
Fabio, pass the.
Yes, thank you for this extremely interesting lecture. I was surprised that blockchain appeared here also. You know, it's everywhere, not here also. But I was interested in that you mentioned that they would be used, but are blockchains used at the moment, or are somewhere?
Oh, yes. There are several studies today of using blockchain in archival studies. Yes, there are. What I've seen, at least from these articles, which one, the last one is the one that I talked about with the digital tokens for storage, okay, are really studying exactly how in the future archival records can be authenticated. The problem is that what we are facing today is, at least in the government or even institutions as universities, are platforms which are completely different, because our platforms today are made of data, not of document or records, okay? Now, we have modules, output modules that take data and put it inside, and then we see a document which is not really, which represents some data taken. Now, inside the platform, all the data that is there is a data which each and every unity of data has a ledger, okay, where it is said exactly what kind of persons or officers can get into that and can intervene on that. For example, can they only see it, write on it, sign it, and so on. And of course, each and every office or person, exactly the second where they are entering this data. So this is auto-authenticated data already. We don't need this. The problem is all the rest digital objects that we are talking about, which is another thing. So I'm not worried about the data platforms today for government and so on, which are in themselves authenticated all the time because they already have ledgers. They don't need blockchains. They don't need blockchains. The point is all the other digital objects, and as we are here today for cultural heritage, what I'm worried about is the cultural heritage objects that are going around all the world, and we don't know exactly what they are. We don't know really what they are. I mean, I see the Mona Lisa is the Mona Lisa is the Mona Lisa, but if I have to use it really, okay, what kind of green exactly is there? What kind of blue is it? I don't know. This is the point here, I think, more than the government part of it.
Okay, thank you very much for these questions and for these answers in this discussion. I think now we are perfectly on schedule to move to the next presentation, which will be by Professor Fabio Vitali from the University of Bologna. As far as I understand, Professor Vitali is a computer scientist, primarily at least, and his topic today is related as well to metadata, expressing uncertain statements in digital metadata, the case of digital cultural heritage. Please.
Thank you. Yes, my background is...
Oh, sure.
Sorry.
No, this is
Dorit is fine.
I'm awfully sorry. So, yes, my background is actually in computer and law, and I have a degree in mathematics, a PhD in computer and law, and I teach computer science to digital humanists. So I think that I just need to include some medicine and some agricultural studies, and I basically reach the... But I'm very surprised because even though I didn't speak with Dorit for 2 years, actually we end up having presentations that are clearly not the same presentation, but in many ways are compatible and basically talking about several similar issues here. Her point was about the digital object. My point is about the digital metadata accompanying the digital object. And in both cases, we want to express and to represent in many ways the complexity that arises and that encompasses everything about the conversion from the physical to the digital world. So what I'm going to discuss about the use of metadata in cultural heritage, what is uncertainty and what we mean by uncertainty in the fact that the current metadata models have a lot of problems in representing things that we are not completely confident about. And I would like to express things and accompany a digital object with metadata that we are not completely sure about, but are interesting to be expressible in about things. And I will be finally, briefly introducing you to conjectures, which is our own little proposal to represent in an effective way things that are not certain as metadata to digital objects. So metadata basically is data about data. I use the green to represent the data and the blue to represent the data. And basically, what are we going to discuss is things that we want to say about the things that we care about. And basically, even when we are writing scholarly papers, when we are writing scholarly books and so on about our cultural heritage, what we are doing is creating texts that themselves are data that we want to describe in many ways with metadata, but about some kind of cultural object. My focus will be on the green part, the things we say about our digital object. And well, basically, what I'm saying is a continuous flow of information between like the text metadata and the structured metadata, the catalogs and the inventories and so on. And I see a very poor situation because while texts, articles, scholarly books, and so on are extremely complex and full of interesting information, most of which are of deductive or opinionated nature. Metadata, the structured information, the data sets are extremely poor in that regard. And the point is that basically in the current situation in which we have so much information to deal with, whenever we commit to a digital tool our information, the only way for us to use it is to be able to find it. And find the information within text is complicated, and you have to use like machine learning and NLP, or maybe actually having PhD students read the books, but that is painful and expensive and slow and so on. Or you want to use some kind of digital tools to help you out, and these are notoriously unreliable and incomplete, and they have a lot of issues. So what you do is that you extract some meaningful pieces of information and represent them in catalogs and in data sets as, say, simple statements, simple facts, structured information about your object. Are they reliable? Are they complete? Are they relevant? I want to add another dimension to what Dorit already discussed, which is something that has been come out in the past. Are they interesting? Are they relevant for our cultural discussions? So traditionally, we decide that the catalogs the metadata are descriptive or structural or administrative or reference or statistical or legal. They do not talk about the things, they talk about the surroundings, the borders of the things. And there is a clear objective, a clear focus on objective and factual information about data that are aimed to manage the resources rather than to talk about the discourses. Problem is that our metadata categories and our metadata schemas are cages that fully and heavily restrict what we can say about our digital object. And we see a lot of bad situations. We see coercion in which we force information about our digital object in the wrong categories just because we do not have the right. We have reticence, which is my serious problem, in which we do not say a lot of things we know about just because we are not completely sure about it, and there is no specific category about that. And we have another situation which I call dumping, in which we take non-structured information fields like description. What can we put inside description? Anything. And a lot of information we have a clear idea about, for which we have no field, no right structure about, we just dump it into the description. And basically, if you dump it in the description, you lose it. There's no way to retrieve it anymore. I have an example, I showed it already. This is a record from Europeana. It's a very long record, and this is the same information in the Europeana data model. But I would like to have some older records because it's clearer, and also there were actually two sets of records about the same Europeana record. So what is this? This is an image from a 1757 book by Giambattista Piranesi about the Colosseum. So 1757, that is a printed book describing the very good, beautiful things in Rome and so on. And it was present in the European record in many different ways. Sometimes it is described as being the subject being the Colosseum rather than the book. So we have this mix-up of the object of the image rather than the image itself. And for instance, you see, it's very hard to see here. The subject is James Caulfield and Gustav III of Sweden. Why? Because the subject was the only way to create a connection, an active connection to other entities, and they wanted to represent the fact that the book was dedicated to James Caulfield and Gustav III, and that was basically the only field they could use to represent this kind of information, and so it has become the subject of that. And this is the dumping, the description field, in which we actually end up with the real information. This is not even the Giambattista Piranesi book. This is a 1957 photograph by Conrad Helbig, which was a very famous art photographer of the 50s and 60s. And this is the output of one of the exhibitions of his early work, including a photograph of Giambattista Piranesi, which is an image of the Colosseum. So you see, this is completely stratified and complicated, and our metadata do not represent correctly the information in no way whatsoever. And actually, what I told you about this information is actually completely a reconstruction that I did by deduction, and it's not factual by any means. It is just my personal interpretation of the composition of things. How do text and structural metadata differ? So we have books, we have articles, we have things written in text meant to be read by humans, and we had a lot of structured data that we express and represent so that machines can read it. So we have Wikipedia, for instance, and Wikidata. The quality and sources are the same, but Wikipedia is meant to be read by humans, and Wikidata is meant to be read by machines making use of metadata. And this, what you see, is a painting, sorry, by, we'll come to that. called Salvator Mundi, currently probably attributed to Leonardo da Vinci. We are not sure about that. And the Wikipedia article has 60,000 words, several images, telling you that there are about 30 copies of variations of these topics executed by Leonardo's pupils and followers. The original painting is either destroyed or lost about 1603. The painting was this painting was damaged by restoration attempts and was attributed originally to Bernardo Luini, a follower of Leonardo. In 2005, it was sold for less than $10,000. Overpainted, dark and gloomy. It was restored, and it was subsequently authenticated and associated to the real original painting by Leonardo, and it was sold in 2017 for $450 million to a Saudi prince called Badr bin Abdullah. That's a very interesting story. This is by far the largest amount of money ever spent on a classical painting ever. So what is Wikidata saying? 40 statements, one image. It is a painting. It was painting in 1419. It is called Salvator Mundi, Italian Renaissance. It was in London in 1914, and it is an unknown location in 2020. It belonged to 18 individuals between 1649 and 2020, last of which is Mohammed bin Salman. It is an example of religious art exposing a point of view of Christianity. It was created by Leonardo da Vinci, attributed. It was auctioned for £45.58 and restored in 2007 and sold in 2017 for $450 million. It's an oil painting with over a walnut panel, 45 centimeters by 65 centimeters. Depicts Jesus, a man, as a Salvator Mundi, and an orb. That is everything that we are committing to our machines. No depth, no history, no background, no explanation, no nothing. So our machines are receiving facts. Everything that I told you about is probably totally true. Facts, probably boring facts, much shorter story, no details, no depth, and basically they are administrative details. What I would like to introduce you is that in order to express more interesting things, we have to deal with things that are not facts, that are not certain, that are uncertainties. And there are a lot of ways, a lot of reasons we are not sure about our things. For instance, we have temporary ignorance. We do not know. We have data that evolves. We have disagreements about scholars. And we have challenges in which we assume something to be true when it is not actually true. What to do with these situations? Reticence, not mentioning, which is what actually is happening, for instance, within Wikidata, is one of those situations, and this is wrong. So, again, I'm not going to discuss that into details, but we are going to express this in Semantic Technology. So we are going to see, I'm technologist, so I will show you some examples to represent uncertainties. The point, again, is that however we represent them, we will then be able to find it if our tools allow the representation of complexities in the right way. So let's start with something very simple, non-uncertain attribution. As the Wikipedia says, of Leonardo da Vinci works, the Mona Lisa is the only portrait whose authenticity has never been seriously questioned. And we represent it as basically a single line, the third line on the right, Mona Lisa DC creator Leonardo da Vinci, which can be read as Mona Lisa was created by Leonardo da Vinci. Now, there are differences between what this thing says and what that thing says, but pretty much we can accept it as being exactly the same thing. This is the same thing in Wikidata metadata, but it's actually basically pretty much the same thing. Basically, Wikidata uses numbered properties and entities, so it becomes quite more complicated to read it, but WDT P170 actually means creator, so this is actually the same thing. What about an uncertain attribution? So what about Salvator Mundi? The leading Leonardo expert Martin Kempf said that he knew immediately that the restored painting was the work of Leonardo. Jacques Frank attributes the painting to Salai jointly with Boltrafio. Let's do it simple. Salvatore Ricci creator Leonardo da Vinci, Salvatore Ricci creator Salai, Salvatore Ricci creator Boltrafio. This is not exactly the same meaning. The only way to understand this in RDF using semantic web technology is Salvatore Mundi was created by Leonardo da Vinci, by Salai, and by Boltrafio. There is no differences. So this is clearly, completely, totally wrong. It is not representing in any possible way the complexity of the thought. Same thing with Wikidata. What it actually happens is that Wikidata includes a ranking, so it is possibly representing the best and the worst attribution. So right now, Wikidata only represents the best ranking, and it says that the Salvator Mundi is by Leonardo da Vinci, which is, to the best of my knowledge, incomplete and possibly totally wrong. So we could add two ranks, one with attribution to Leonardo and the other with attribution to Salai and Boltrafio, and having a best rank for the moment to Leonardo and a deprecated rank to represent something that we do not, record, but we do not truly, completely agree with as being the Salai and Boltrafio attribution. So, in a way, Wikidata has a way to represent debated statements with ranking. Ranking is complicated, and less than 1% of all statements in Wikidata have a different ranking than the normal ranking. Normal ranking is the automatic ranking. So basically, there's very, very, very few debatable statements in Wikidata. If you go and look at the art painting in Wikidata, you have less than 450 over more than 3 million art items in Wikidata, less than 450 deprecated rank statements. So there is no debate, there is no representation of the complexity in any way. Other ways to represent uncertainties. Traditionally, we have many ways. I'm not going into details, but just read it. So exactly the same sentence with the two different attributions. The traditional one, so everybody that has a dealing with RDF will say, well, just reify that. And reification has this huge list and completely complicated list of statements. And you probably see, well, but basically maybe it's a way to represent that it's complicated, but the meaning is easier for the machine to understand. That's not true, because if you try to read it for the machines themselves, you end up with a very convoluted way. S1 is a statement whose subject is Salvator Mundi, whose predicate is being created by, and whose subject is Leonardo da Vinci, and it's attributed to Martin Kemp. The other is S2A is a statement whose subject is Salvator Mundi, whose predicate is being created by, whose object is Salai. S2B is a statement. So there is no way out. It's complicated for humans, and it's also complicated for machines. And finding this information using reification is just as complicated as you expect it to be. And this is not a solution. SciDoc CRM, Dorit mentioned that. SciDoc CRM has this penchant for creating artificial entities, the activity, the event. So we complicate our ontology with introducing some abstract categories, and we create this what is called n-ary relationship. So basically, you say Salvator Mundi is a man-made thing, a production event exists that produces Salvator Mundi, an attribution activity exists about the entity that carried out the production event P1 that is associated to Leonardo da Vinci according to Martin Kemp, but another attribution activity A2 exists about the entity that carried out the production event which is associated to Salai and Boltrafio. And I don't like it. I mean, it's still very much seems convoluted and indirect in many ways. So in classical semantic web, this is where we are. We have something simpler called named graph using the latest RDF version of 2014, in which we created basically groups of statements. One is Salvatore DC creator Leonardo da Vinci, and this first group was attributed to Martin Kemp. And the second is DC creator, Salvatore was created by Salai and Boltrafio, and this was attributed to Jacques Frank. These are container. Unfortunately, the naive interpretation of this is false. The real interpretation of this is Salvator Mundi was created by Leonardo da Vinci, and this is according to Martin Kemp. Salvator Mundi was created by Soili and Boltrafio, and this is according to Jacques Frank. There is no exclusion of the two things. There is no separation. They are both true at the same time. I cannot say something that is not true in RDF, in classical RDF. Well, I can with RDF star. Some of you may have heard of RDF star. It's a new proposal in which we basically express things that are not true, whose truth value is not completely guaranteed. And so there is a statement, Salvator Mundi was created by Leonardo da Vinci, attributed to Martin Kemp, another to Jacques Frank, and so on. But each of them is independent of each other. So there is no way to say Soili and Boltrafio go together and are by Jacques Frank, and Leonardo da Vinci goes alone and is by Martin Kemp. So this is still not the right thing from my point of view. So all examples have problems. They have secondary entities, like CRM invented entities. There are many more statements that are apparently necessary. As I just show you this wall of RDF statements that are meant to be complicated because they are complicated, not just for non-scholars, non-computer scientists, also for computer science. They are complicated, and they are complicated for search engines and so on. And therefore, we introduced conjectures, our proposals. They are an extensions to named graph, in which we explicitly identify some named graph as not being asserted. So we have this distinction between undisputed claims. Nobody has yet created any kind of complaint about that. Disputed claim, in which there is at least more than one possible incompatible opinion on the same thing, and settled claims, in which we recognize the existence of a disagreement, but we also recognize that there is a pretty much ongoing decision that one of these disputed is the true one. And as you can see here, it's fairly simple. Basically, you have the undisputed Mona Lisa was created by Leonardo da Vinci. We have the non-successful conjecture Salvator was created by Soili and Boltrafio, and you have the collapsed conjecture, which is the conjecture that is currently being accepted as potentially valid, which is a collapsed conjecture, a settled conjecture, which is Salvator Mundi was created by Leonardo da Vinci. So what we are trying to provide, I'm not going into details, but basically this is not an extension of the semantic of RDF. You can express exactly the same thing using plain RDF with a kind of trick that provides you with very clear and very simple and very straightforward way to represent the same thing in plain RDF, while still having the same expressive model of conjectures. So in our proposal, this is the full thing. It is a conjecture that Salvator Mundi was created by Leonardo da Vinci, and it is a conjecture that Salvator Mundi was created by Soili and Boltrafio. Further application. Temporal and geographical uncertainties. We do not know where Leonardo da Vinci was born and where. So it could be that he was born in Anciano near Vinci, or it could be that he was born in Florence. So we want to have both conjectures to be expressed at the same time. They are incompatible statements, but we want to express both of them, representing our choice, but also the non-winning choice as well. We want to represent evolving information. This is before and after, in both cases, of painting by Bronzino. I'm out of time, I guess. So just a last example for legal people. In 1993, an Italian pop singer, Albano Carrisi, sued megastar Michael Jackson for plagiarism, claiming that the song Will You Be There by Jackson was derived from Carrisi's I Cigni di Balaca. After the first ruling in favor of Carrisi, Jackson lawyers appealed and claimed that much older tool, Bless You for Being an Angel by the Ink Spot, was the source of both songs. And the judge ruled in favor of Michael Jackson. So what we have now is a situation in which we have two statements from Albano Carisi's lawyers and from Michael Jackson lawyers claiming as facts two partially similar stories with just a little difference. If you have a look at the first conjecture, which is Albano Carisi's lawyers' things, and the second one, they have the first four items that are exactly the same. So there is no doubt that Cini di Balaka is a song. There is no doubt that it was recorded in 1987. And there is no doubt that Will You Be There was a song and it was recorded in 1993. But then the disagreement is on who influenced what. Basically, Albano Carisi says Will You Be There was influenced by Cini di Balaka, while Michael Jackson says, was that Cini di Balaka was influenced by Bless You for Being an Angel, and also Will You Be There was influenced by Bless You for Being an Angel. So we have two sets of statements, clearly incompatible with each other, very hard to express that in RDF plainly. And then we have the ruling by the judge that says, Michael Jackson says is right. And basically it collapses the conjecture into being the verdict, the veredictum, the representation of truth, which is actually what the verdict actually means. So basically, how do I use RDF to represent points of view? Well, we have another way to say both parts in a juridical case can, as they want, represent their point of view as facts, but the judge will downgrade them to conjecture, to opinions, and then provide their own final opinion as the judgment. So facts are easy, facts are boring, facts are few and only a minimal part of what we want to know and remember. We need to find a way to express doubts, opinions, disagreements, debates that are currently very hard to represent in metadata collections. And I think that cultural heritage, and why not lawyers themselves, should call for adequate formalisms and tools to represent doubts, debates, disputes, and so on. And I think that our collections of metadata about our digital heritage need to be enriched with non-objective facts because they are basically the most important information we know about our things. Thank you.
Thank you for this. Please stay for a second. We might have a time for at least one question. Thank you for this interesting presentation. And now we, as I said, have very little time, but we do have a little bit of time still for a question from the audience or from online. Please. Yes, please.
Use the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's here. Okay, thank you so much. So this is perhaps more of a comment, but it also relates to the previous presentation to some extent. So previously I have been working in this project where we faced this problem or perhaps a contradiction because archive people and historians and also as lawyers, we often see the problem as that we don't have enough metadata or enough information about certain objects. But because in the project we dealt with indigenous cultural heritage, then we ran into this problem that not all information is meant to be published or public. So there was this contradiction that we wanted as much information as we can get, and our indigenous contributors were saying that, okay, you don't need this much information and we don't want this to be public. So have you perhaps run into this kind of problem, and what do you think about this? Like, I don't expect you to necessarily have an answer, but just wanted to introduce this angle of discussion.
Okay, that is a new thing for me to have it in cultural heritage. Well, this is a very interesting point of view, but we certainly approach this point of view when representing information that are not meant to be published in text documents. And I'm talking specifically in the legal domain, there are situations in which, for privacy purposes, you want to hide some details about, for instance, judgment. Say, for instance, you have a very complicated case involving minors or something like that, and you want to publish the sentence of the judge, and you want to separate the details about the individuals involved from the actual content of the sentence, because it's, of course, the privacy of the people need to be respected. So there are ways. The Ferber model, for instance, provides a conceptual model to say, well, this document, which is the judgment from the judge, can have multiple separate controlled versions, in some of which some information can be omitted. So there is a conceptual work which contains every information, and then you create separate, what they are called expressions, separate versions, each of which contains only a fragment of the information. They know each other, and each expression has a different set of permissions and people allowed to have a look at them and so on. So this is something that, for instance, in judgment is frequently done, and I think there are good ways, and I think that the Ferber model provides a good conceptual model to represent that. I would love to provide you with more details.
Okay, thank you very much for this question and for this answer and this presentation. Now time has come for us to move to the third presentation in this session. This presentation touches upon a technology that relates to Web3 and blockchain, namely non-fungible tokens. And the presentation will be given by Professor Peter Metze from the University of Szeged. And as far as I understand, you are primarily a lawyer and focused on copyright law and comparative law. So please, your presentation should be here. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. And let me just start my phone to show me how much time I have, because the presentation that I prepared for you was already presented at various places in 50 minutes each. So I have to reduce myself to 25 minutes. And indeed, especially following the two previous presentations, I think I could speak even more than 50. I will at least partially reflect on the first presentation, because I think there are, in my understanding, referring to your question actually, sir, there are overlaps in the two fields, but these are not the same questions, of course. Without further ado, let's start the presentation here, which is practically focusing about or on the copyright aspects of NFTs. I must stress this because I know the event is very much focusing on cultural preservation. I will touch upon cultural preservation in this presentation as well, but I also save some time for the afternoon discussion to focus on questions related to NFTs as well and cultural preservation. But in order to understand what I'm really talking about, we have to understand what really NFTs are about. So this is why this presentation is at least partially focusing on technological aspects. And because I'm a copyright person, you mentioned quite a lot on copyright. We are working with some colleagues all across Europe on NFTs project. One of the papers which I'm currently finalizing is written together with Florian Idelberger, where we are writing a very short summary on NFTs per se and copyright issues related to that. This is going to be a very short paper, but here we try to give a definition for NFTs, which is very important because this expression is very fancy, but it's very hard to define. I'm not sure we really should or would be able to define what NFTs are, but we try to do this. And of course, on the screen, we try to highlight the keywords of this definition with red, underlining, etc. This is a blockchain-based issue. I don't need to explain blockchain, I believe, but non-fungible is something which is more important here, which practically means it's not fungible. Fungible means you can replace elements over the blockchain, like Bitcoin. Pieces of Bitcoin indeed, it can be separated into smaller and smaller pieces, unlike NFTs. NFTs are unique, individual, scarce entries over the blockchain. But what it makes important for us here is that NFTs are mainly representations of physical or digital items, either digitized physical contents or digital born contents, typically photos, or any anything else can be, of course, scanning of paintings or 3D copies of artworks can also come into the scope of NFTs as well. What's very important, there is already some kind of overlap with your presentation here. NFTs represent metadata, indeed structured metadata. Indeed, if I say this, it's a very strange summary here, but NFTs might be classified as metadata on data's metadata, which is what the hell, practically all, let's say, data information or item like Leonardo's paintings are there as valid entities or entries. There are metadata on them. We heard in both presentations what kind of metadata can be related to a certain work, for example, but NFTs add extra metadata. The NFT metadata is about authenticity. It's about how can we guarantee that the metadata on the data is valid. It's a very strange thing, but indeed, this is what it makes fancy for many people nowadays. And one final thing, NFTs are interoperable because these are mainly on the Ethereum blockchain, but you can also sell NFTs on other blockchain systems. What is missing, however, from the whole NFT system is that you really don't own what's behind the NFT. NFT is not about the work itself, it's about the authenticity related, if you talk about works, of course, it's about the authenticity of the work. Very interesting. Well, this slide is much more about the most important aspects of NFTs. I think I only highlight them here to you. They are scarce, provable, and valuable. They are very importantly there to make money, or at least these are mainly used to generate money. And in the last part of the on the slide of this picture, you see it's very much used for disseminating artworks or collectibles, as you will see. Very shortly, let me show you a basic history of NFTs. The whole NFT story started with the basic problem: how can you prove or how can you authenticate who is having what, actually. Kevin McCoy is an artist who had this real problem that once he creates a digital artwork and he sells it, he really cannot not only control, but he really has no idea where the content is, who has it, who does what to that given content. So they, in a pitch overnight, created the concept of NFTs many years before. There you can see on that end of the slide, the first ever NFT from Kevin McCoy, actually. Throughout the years, NFTs were, however, used to authenticate any kind of information from collectible rare paper cards, or one of the first big hits of the NFT craze, the Nyan Cat GIF animation, which was created many years before, but in February last year, it was sold for $500,000. Not the GIF itself. You see, I also have it. I didn't spend $500,000 on just such a stupid GIF here, but someone saw the NFT that represented, you can further sell the NFT related to the Nyan Cat. And when you mentioned $4.5 million for Salvator Mundi, that is certainly a big amount for a real artwork. But the whole NFT craze became globally well-known and visible when two contents were sold by an American digital artist called Beeple, who has sold works for less than $100 on average before he could manage to sell the first 5,000 days collage of the first 5,000 images on his social networking sites for close to $70 million US dollars in Ether, actually, in March something last year. But NFTs are there to cover every aspect of digital life nowadays, not only artworks, but also fandom issues. It's very much used for sports collectibles. You can own an NFT related to sport achievements. Here is just a dunk from a basketball player, Anthony Edwards. You can have this video in your digital wallet. We have European examples for sports collectibles as well. So the Spanish La Liga teamed up with an NFT producer in Spain to sell La Liga scenes actually, or goals, or etc. What makes NFTs nowadays, however, very famous is PFPs, so avatars, personal profile pictures that are occasionally sold for millions or tens of millions of dollars. There are plenty of various collections, llamas, bored apes, or what, by the way, I'm coming from Hungary. The event is recorded, so I shouldn't speak that much about Hungarian politics, but we also have NFTs about our prime minister, although you can probably compare the value of a bored ape versus an Orban image. They are 100 to 200 or so. I mean, monkeys are more valuable than these images. And when I speak about art or cultural preservation, we certainly cannot evade the role of museums and galleries. I didn't do that much research on archives, I must admit. I'm much more focusing on museums and galleries, but they are very active in the NFT scene. We have plenty of information about tokenizing artworks by museums or with by tech companies teaming up with museums. There is a very big story from Russia. Last year, Russia, from the Hermitage, they just raised approximately $500,000 by tokenizing only a few artworks. By the way, in 2 copies, one of the copies were sold. I mean, the NFT was sold, the other token was kept by Hermitage. Another very recent news is about the tokenizing of only 5 artworks, including Leonardo da Vinci's portrait of a musician, if it's Leonardo, but most probably Leonardo. And these contents were also sold for approximately, altogether the 5 images, I mean, for close to $500,000 US. Half of the money went to the museum, but half of the other money went to the company digitizing the contents. You might see there is this image. This is actually a projector which shows the high quality copy of the portrait in beautiful wooden, what's that, case, or what's that, anyway. It's a very interesting concept, by the way. And there are galleries, of course, selling either born digital art or tokenized contents in physical settings, like the Art Basel auction last year just sold those 3 tulips for approximately $200,000. So it's just very interesting. Anyway, short images about the economic realities of NFTs. Last year, this is just an image from Statista from last year, but until 15th of September, you might see that the price or the value of the sold via NFTs sold artworks has skyrocketed around the end of the summer. Nowadays, it's not that much skyrocketing anymore, but it's still quite high amount of numbers that we generate from NFT sales. The most well-known open NFT platform, OpenSea, is valued as $13 billion US, although only by the end of the last year. Now its value is a little bit less. As you might see, there's another image that shows that approximately the end of January this year was the peak of the NFT sales. Since then, the value of the sales has decreased significantly, approximately 80%, but this changes all the time. So there are ups and downs. Certainly, it's still with us. There was a month, at least in January, when the monthly sales were $4 billion US. So it's really interesting. But there's an image. I'm not willing to spend too much time on that, but I like to show this image because it's a very interesting, almost art-like visualization of who is a major contributor to this whole NFT market. Colors indicate big players. Okay, so big players who are where NFTs are centered or where NFTs are mainly located are just only handsome people. There are a few who collect a lot and sell a lot. In other words, there are hundreds of thousands of people who purchase and sell NFTs, but only dozens who really make a big fortune on that and who really do it as a real business. The vast majority, 90% of people don't even make income from NFTs. They try to sell stuff, but no one really purchases them. This is why many people regularly call this issue as a hype, because it's really hype for the benefit of few, very few, versus the vast majorities. Anyway, but this image, this pixel-based profile was sold for almost 24 million US dollar. Again, just compare with the urban profile, they have a slightly different value. Again, because I'm a copyright guy, I'm mainly focusing on the copyright aspects of NFTs here, but again, I'm open for discussion, and in the afternoon, informal conversation, I will talk much more about the cultural preservation perspectives of our research back in Hungary. There are plenty of questions to talk about with respect to NFTs, but we usually say these are just thought experiments. Why? You will see at the very end of my presentation, because NFTs do not really pose extremely complicated copyright questions. I say this in the sense that we have for almost all the sub-questions clear copyright answers. So this is really not a paradigm shift because of the whole structure of the NFT environment. You see the main questions that I'm going to focus on, and on the bottom I indicate those copyright aspects which I'm not presenting in these slides, but I'm open to discuss at some point. So let's start very shortly with the most fundamental copyright question. Is there any work at issue or author at issue? And we certainly have to answer this question in two ways. There are no works in the tokens, but tokens can point to works. The token itself, the NFT itself, is just a metadata. But the content behind the token can certainly be a work. And of course, I don't show you more artworks, I have done that. I show you, however, these kind of PFPs, so profile pictures here, for good reason. Plenty, or maybe I might say the majority of tokens are about automatically generated images. You might see these profile pictures over there. These are generated by algorithms, which is important because, at least in copyright law, we usually argue that copyright protection exists over works of expression of humans. If an algorithm creates an output, according to current status quo of European copyright law, but also in the US and most typically everywhere, these outputs then are not protected by copyright, or at least it must be a verbal gymnastics to fit anything like that into the concept of work/authorship, because the machine has done these. In copyright perspective, from a copyright perspective, these contents might fall into public domain. But it doesn't mean they have no value. It doesn't mean you cannot license them. You cannot put them into a contract, into a smart contract, and sell them or the NFT, by the way. Anyway, most probably this is not a real question for copyright people, whether those profile pictures are protected or not. They are most probably not, but they can be sold. Next question, moral rights. Imagine there is an image which is protected by copyright, so an artwork, let's say, by a human. What about moral rights? Can attribution, paternity, first publication apply for NFTs? Well, without any problem. NFTs are usually, again, pointing to contents created at some point, and here's the magic, they are uploaded to a server. And not only uploaded to a physical location, but when they are sold, most probably to public NFT platforms, there are plenty of valuable, hopefully valid, data on the content or about the author. Here is just a screenshot from OpenSea about, by the way, a GIF animation, but I couldn't save it as a GIF animation. It didn't allow me to download the animation, but this is an animation of moving ducks. This is very much brain destroying GIF here because the ducks are moving, circling around anyway. But if you just take a look at the screen, you see it has a title, it has an author or creator, it has further information when it was posted on OpenSea, etc. These information are relevant for moral rights purposes, from paternity, first publication reasons, etc. NFTs do not touch upon, they do not pose threat to moral rights questions. That's very important. At least I believe so. Next thing, which is bringing us much closer to copyright problems. We call it copy fraud, although copy fraud is a very broad expression, can cover various types of fraudulent or illegal activities. I have multiple examples here, but I have much more than the 4 that I showed to you. Here is one example. Here, a physical project. These stormtrooper helmets were painted by big painters, well-known modern artists in the United States. And then what happened? The person who curated the whole project decided to take photographs of the helmets and tokenize them and started to sell the tokenized images to the helmets. So not the helmets, but the images to the helmets, without, however, even pointing to the names of the authors of the helmets. We can easily conclude these are works, actually, although adaptations, and maybe Star Wars and Disney have some issues here as well, but forget about that. And there is a legal issue here in the United States on how and whether you can tokenize and sell the photographs of artworks like these. Very interesting. Another very interesting ongoing legal case from the United States. There is an album from Jay-Z which was published by Rockefeller. Rockefeller is at least partially owned another person, Damon Dash in hats, who is a partial owner of the company, which means he has some kind of interest over the records of Rockefeller, but he decided to tokenize the whole album and sell it for anyone over an NFT platform. Rockefeller, the company, sued one of its owners, actually claiming you cannot do this because you are only one of the owners of the company. So there are issues like these. You have no title to sell, at least this case is about the question whether you have right to sell a token related to copyrighted content on your own if you are not the only owner of a company. Very interesting question. Another very famous case. It's not a court case yet, but can be. This picture is a picture by an official photographer, which was put into public domain because the lady waived of the copyrights, and then someone tokenized the public domain image and started to sell the image through NFT. Very interesting. Can you sell public domain content in on your behalf? And by the way, against the will of the author who waived copyrights. Very interesting. And one of the most well-known cases coming again from the United States. You might see US is already on the NFT cases. We don't really have European cases, but well, time will show whether we will have at all. This is a very interesting case, by the way, because this is not only about copyright per se. This is about contracts. Why? Because there was Quentin Tarantino writing Pulp Fiction, directing Pulp Fiction, but cutting pieces of the script. So he didn't even make an audiovisual adaptation of the script for 5 uncut scenes. And then he decided to sell the uncut written scenes, so from the script. And Miramax immediately, 9 days, submitted a claim against Tarantino that you cannot sell uncut scenes from the script because you have already sold the script rights to us. Tarantino says, no, I never sold the script rights to you. So this is a copyright/contract issue, but you might see NFTs can bring in copy fraud questions like these. Now jumping to a much more a slightly different question connected to the previous but much more dogmatic question. Which economic rights are involved in NFTs? This is important because, in copyright, it's very important to know what technology you use, what you exactly do, whether it's distribution, selling, whether it's online, on-demand, internet, or streaming versus broadcasting, blah, blah, blah. It's a basic issue for copyright people. I just conclude here, guys. This is making available to the public under the European interpretation, because what really happens in the NFT situation is that you store a content to which the token points you. This content is stored in a server, offered as on-demand for anyone. In European legal sense, this is making available to the public where the end user can select the time and place of access to the content point. Very interestingly, in the United States, they don't have making available to the public right. They indeed translate this term to 3 different rights under US Copyright Act. It depends upon how you do the use. If you transfer a copy, transfer an exact copy from A to B, this is distribution in the US. If you simply show make it available on demand, then it's performance. And if you show only still images of whatever, then it's displayed. It's very interesting, but it's okay for Americans under international treaties, it's possible. In Europe, nevertheless, you see I said it's making available, but it's expressly not distribution. In Europe, we call distribution only for the transfer of ownership of most probably, but mainly tangible copies. But if this is not distribution, then here's another magic, then the resale royalty, which is a very big hit for artworks, is most probably not applicable. Resale royalty only applies for the resale of the originally sold, so distributed physical copies. Resale royalty seems to be totally excluded for multiple reasons. I only indicated 6 things here, but very importantly, NFTs are offering resale royalty for people. They we shouldn't call it resale royalty. They offer some kind of payment for original or earlier owners of the contents. Indeed, much more and in much more flexible legal circumstances. I'm not telling them to you here because time is passing by, but they are on the screen and I'm happy to share my presentation as well. But very interestingly, what is present in copyright law per se for the analog world, we have it coded in NFTs by platforms themselves. Very interesting. Fundamental question, what do we acquire? Acquisition of what? Let me show all the 3 dimensions here. I might differentiate between 3 main dimensions. If I am selling to you something, what do I do? Practically, because I actually mentioned this is making available to the public, which is generally under the structure of a certain NFT platform in line with its license, etc. That's not a transfer of ownership, but it's a sale. I can sell it to you under a smart contract, but don't be misled. This might be a sale under civil law, but not a distribution under copyright law. It's a very interesting thing here. What about NFTs versus the offline world? And we have to stress that if someone puts a content on the NFT or to the blockchain, he will never lose the right to manage the tangible content. So even if, and now time is passing by in 5 seconds, so if a museum, or not only a museum, but I as an author tokenize an artwork and sell the NFT to someone else, he only has the NFT and I have the work. I can sell the tangible copy to you outside of NFTs as well. Very interesting. And third dimension, platform versus user. This is probably the most questionable issue here because OpenSea sells whatever you want to sell. But people sometimes sell contents which were originally published on social media platforms or platforms per se, not necessarily social media. One of the most well-known items was the first tweet of Jack Dorsey. Here comes the question, can I sell my tweet? It might sound like a naive question, but it isn't, because when you sign up for Twitter, you sign the end-user license agreement of Twitter, and Twitter necessitates you to transfer certain rights to Twitter, especially with respect to contents which are represented with the GUI of the given platform. So this is very much a mixture of who has what and whether I can sell my embedded content into a social media platform. I hope you can understand what I mean here, but it's really interesting, not to mention the fact that many social media platforms started to hire last year NFT engineers. They most probably will switch to Web3 as well, and they will sell tokens directly. But do they have the right to sell my words, my work? That's the other dimension of the whole issue. Very, very interesting. Anyway, time is passing by. For lawyers, it might matter, but we also spent some time with my colleagues from Amsterdam to analyze whether these platforms are CSSP, so-called online content sharing service providers, under the most recent European copyright reform, and we conclude not. I'm not wasting your time with this very nuanced copyright issue here. I only stress, mind the gap, NFTs are here. This is very much relevant for the young generation. I don't say they are the only ones, but for young generation, that's very important. This is present for political issues here as well. Just a few weeks before when the war was on, but only a few days after that, one of the members of Pussy Riot just tokenized the Ukrainian flag and sold it for $7 million US. Forget about the fact whether you can tokenize, whether you can use a national flag, because it's probably excluded by certain laws. Anyway, and Web3 is here. There are existing and developing business models there who generate plenty of money. Not for everyone. You see, in March, there were only 200,000 people selling NFTs globally. This is really, I mean, a niche still. It sounds like a big thing, but only a niche one. But otherwise, fraud issues, NFT seizures, and NFT suspensions are raging. There is quite a lot of issues here, but I'm not sure this is a big copyright thing here, but can be used in multiple dimensions by many other people, and just a list of recommended readings for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. I will take the liberty, even though it is now 10:40 and as scheduled we should have a coffee break now, I will take the liberty of allowing one question or comment from the audience. Fabio, please.
Yes, thank you. That was extremely interesting, and you gave me a lot of answers to questions I had and I wanted to ask about. But there is one remaining question, if I may. And the fact is, so suppose I'm the legitimate owner of a real physical artistic object of some kind, and I decide to go into the NFT with my collection of objects and so on. The kind of contract, and so the sales of what rights I'm giving you to the buyer differs from depending on the kind of ledgers of technology I'm using, or is there a like agreed upon kind of contracting created for NFTs that all basically all adhere to?
Very good question, and the answer is that there is no standardized solution yet. There are trends. Some platforms have a similar logic, but they use slightly different.
Do I decide or do they decide?
Okay. At the very beginning of my presentation, I also highlighted that this whole NFT craze allows you to escape using intermediaries. So it's not necessary to use OpenSea. You can sell an NFT if you have a wallet and I have a wallet. We can do it easily. But in the vast majority of cases, we use either open platforms. There are, of course, closed platforms as well. But in any case, because we use platforms here, they have end-user license agreements. They have their own standard licenses, I would say. They are standard licenses. You cannot change the elements of those contracts. But between platforms, there are differences, actually. We did this partially empirical research with people in Amsterdam at IVIR, where we looked at probably the top 30-some platforms practices. There are at least 3-4 main trends in contracting, but otherwise it's quite close, but not one standard.
Thank you. One more question from online. Jouko Nuottila, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the very interesting presentation. I have one simple question. So, as a digital artist, if I produce some images, for example, I can try to enforce my copyright over, for example, websites who are using my property. But what about as an NFT owner? Is there any way I could enforce my commercial position when, for example, like other websites are showing the image I own token to?
Okay, very good question. The answer is, of course, it very much depends upon what really happened. But we have already seen situations where NFT platforms had to delist certain listings because people who had no authentication to put those NFTs on those given platforms still listed those items. In other words, the notice and takedown system applies for tokens as well. I skipped that slide when I mentioned OCSSPs versus what kind of legal system applies. That exactly connects to your question here, because they are not OCSSPs. It's not the most recent copyright in the Digital Single Market Directive that applies, so not the famous Article 17, but the so-called Information Society Directive plus e-commerce directive. And they are certainly hosting service providers. And hosting service providers, once notified about an illegal content, they have to take content down. So you have tools to tackle unauthorized illegal listings of tokens.
Good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think this concludes our first session. Thank you very much for all the speakers and for the audience. Next, I think we have a coffee break scheduled, and I think we have some coffee waiting for us outside the lecture room. For those of you who are online, unfortunately, of course, no coffee service from our part, but we will be back according to the schedule at 11:20 with our next session that will be that will start as scheduled. Thank you, and let's reconvene here at 11:20.